everyone, and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. Ooh, dark week. Dark week, friends. Though, I suppose I could have said that about any week in the last 6 years or so. Good thing, though, for you, dear listener, I have maybe the most gentle interview I've ever conducted. Yes, my friends, it is Frontperson. And if you don't know who Frontperson is, let me read you the bio for Catherine and Mark, who are the main musicians behind the band. Catherine Calder and Mark Andrew Hamilton have been making music in different bands for years. Catherine is a member of the New Pornographers, has released 3 albums under her own name, and was in the indie pop group Immaculate Machine from 2003 to 2011. Similarly, Mark's primary band since the mid-aughts has been Wood Pigeon, who have released over 24 albums and EPs since their formation. After a chance meeting in the hallway of a recording studio, the two vowed to form a band together one day, and in the late 20-teens, they did just that. Their first self-titled album was released in 2018, and their latest, Parade, was just released last week on Oscar Street Records. And yeah, I love both their albums. The new one is fantastic. If you've never listened to them, I heartily recommend both. It is funny, or let's say funny-ish, but I don't think Catherine or Mark were told about what Beginnings is or what I talked to my guests about, and I think I have a hunch that it threw them. I say this because partway through, Mark commented that he thought I was just going to ask about what certain songs meant. But, dear listener, friends, why would I do that to you? You come here for all the deep existential questions and also some very Jewish gallows humor. That is what I provide. By the way, though, if this is your first time, welcome. I've just told you what to expect. What I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended. If you like this episode, maybe you'll like my talks with, say, other Canadian musicians. I've been doing a lot of those lately because since the pandemic started, I've been doing this on Zoom. But I've talked to Carl Newman. That was actually very early on at a live show, and he played some music. That was great. Frog Eyes, Carrie Mercer, Cadence Weapon, Nick Thorburn of Islands, Julie Doiron, Bashu Balat, and a ton of other people from all creative walks of life, not just musicians, but screenwriters and filmmakers and actors and artists and comedians and authors. So, if you like what you hear and you want to subscribe to the show, you can do that wherever you get your podcast from. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Andy Beckerman. And I got some fantastic episodes coming up, including a ton of comics writers, including some from Canada, such as Ryan North, but also Kelly Thompson and Mike Allred. What else? I did a bunch of interviews with some emerging musicians whose albums I really liked a lot, such as Diane Coffey and powwow singer Joe Rainey. I just talked to Casper Kelly from Adult Swim and a ton of other cool kind of like weird comedy stuff, and that was a very good talk. So stay tuned for these, but for now, let's talk to Catherine and Mark. I mean, now that we're recording, just for the listener to know what emotional space I am occupying, is that like right before literally a minute before we started recording this, I got a text that said my credit card had been stolen and was used to make all these purchases. So that's where we're starting from.
So you're amped up.
Yeah.
Anxiety. It's coursing through every cell in my body. My skin feels alive in a strange way, if that makes sense to you.
Well, thank you. It's nice to meet you too. Yeah.
Well, okay, let me ask this. Where are you both starting out emotionally? This is the first time, also, I'll add this as a parenthetical. This is the first time in years I've had more than one guest on the show. But I'm so happy to have you both on. I just want to put that out there, despite the anxiety bubble I'm living in.
Yeah.
Where are we starting off? I'm starting off. I mean, I was pretty good until you had your credit card stolen. And now I'm stressed for you. No, I'm good.
I was pretty good until I realized I can't use your credit card anymore. But I just stole.
But hey, look, you know what? On the dark web, you can find many other credit cards. So, yeah, I don't know what to do. We live in this age of scams. Like, ever since the 1970s, everything's just become a scam in some way. And I have to assume that this is just going to become so commonplace in the next decade or two that, like, every aspect of our lives is going to be... Sorry, we got real dark real quick.
I mean, yeah.
This is also... I was thinking this morning, because I haven't had two people on in a long time, I was thinking, like, do you both know about each other's childhoods?
Like, have we met?
Well, yeah. Yeah. Have you, I mean, I know you've made music together, but is it just like you've sent tapes back and forth? No, but like, I'm curious, like, I was thinking about like a lot of my friends and I'm like, I don't know if I know, or even my creative partners. I don't know if I like know about their childhoods necessarily in any deep way. I mean, some facts here or there, but I don't know if I know I don't know if I know their childhoods in a way where I can say like, oh, well, that's the foundation where their creative lives came out of.
Well, I've been to Mark's home and I've met his folks. So, in childhood home.
Yeah.
Is that still in Calgary? Are they still in Calgary?
They are still there. That's true. I think we've talked about these things a fair bit. I mean,
yeah.
I think literally all Catherine and I do is like just talk for hours and then make a little bit of music and laugh and then talk some more. So I think I know a lot of interesting things. And I mean, it wasn't her childhood, but I also got to kind of like watch a little bit from far away before I even knew her, you know?
No. What do you mean?
Because I knew her other bands.
Oh, okay.
So before I met her, I knew who she was. Yeah, I don't know if we spend like tons of time talking about our childhoods though, but that'll be a future conversation now, I'm sure.
Yeah. Like, I think that if it came up, if it was related to something that we were talking about that was current, be like, oh yeah, well, this happened, and then, which relates somehow back to my childhood.
Like,
delve deep into our psyches. We're pretty good friends. We're pretty good friends.
Yeah. We talk almost every day, so I'm sure we'll get around to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm wondering if you each have thoughts about how each other's childhoods have contributed to your creative lives. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, it's unlike any question I've ever received before. So, I guess, okay. If I was to paint a picture of what I think Catherine would have been like as a child, I think she would have been incredibly talented, probably quiet, maybe a little bit shy, but ready to play the piano and sing. And was probably outside a lot. I think we would have been friends. How's that?
Yeah. And I mean, what's funny, I'm one of those like introvert extroverts. And when I was a really little kid, I was really extroverted. Like, I would go up to people I didn't know. I had curly blonde hair. I'd be like, hi. Like, I'm Catherine. I play the piano. Like, what kind of an possibly obnoxious child? And then I hit a certain age and just like a polar opposite. I got very, very shy. And just so extremely shy, and was like that for a long time. Except that I still did, like drama in high school, and I would be I really liked theater. So it was like this weird dynamic that I always had where like, very, very shy, but also really liked the spotlight, and that's a weird place to be as a performer because, there's always this like kind of push and pull between those two things that you like being part of a team and part of a group and part of a, you know, you kind of want to be out there and doing your thing and doing it well, and then at the same time you're like, don't look at me. So anyway, so that's me as a kid. And then I don't know if I think of Mark as a kid, I'm assuming, you know, probably kind of similar to what you just said about me.
Yeah, about, except I played the accordion. And
yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's my first instrument. I played the accordion. My mother has a photo of me practicing it on the toilet at the age of 5. And that comes out a lot.
What's the significance of practicing on the toilet?
I just loved it so much and I didn't want to put it down. So I would literally wear it all the time and play it all the time.
Do you know how like some kids like sleep with things that they really love? Like if you give them a really great present, they'll like take it to bed and they're like, I'm never letting this go. Did you sleep with your accordion?
I think I might have a couple of times, but I mean, I fell out of love with it because the accordion, I think you can only really love for so long. And then I didn't play music for like ages and ages. But yeah, I guess I always felt kind of brave as a kid. I just always felt like I was watching everything, I suppose. And I still do. I think that's why I feel kind of confident most of the time. Where I just feel like I'm watching everything. So it doesn't really affect me. I don't really get embarrassed.
Really? So
Yeah.
like, do you feel like you're living on the sidelines in some way?
Not along the sidelines of myself. Like I'm definitely inside me. I'm here, but I guess I just learned like super early on that everything embarrassing that happens to anyone happens to everybody. So there's no point in being embarrassed, and I'm just kind of, I just feel like I'm watching a lot. If that makes sense.
It does. I mean, I don't get it. It makes sense. Like I'm mortified by everything. I'm mortified by my physical body and everything that
Right.
goes along with that.
Yeah, like, I mean, I was bit by a coyote last year, and the first thing I said to it was thank you. Because I was like, oh, that snapped me out of something. And I think if someone stole my credit card, I'd probably just think like, oh, okay, I guess I'll cancel that. And then go for a walk. I don't know.
Wait, so were you like that as a child then? I that seems like,
Yeah,
what's the word? Is it nonplussed?
Nonplussed is a good, I mean, I was an excitable child, and I'm still an excitable adult. But maybe like accepting, or just kind of like interests. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I've never really been asked about my childhood in an interview pertaining to music before.
I want to come back to this, but Catherine, I'm kind of curious about that mix of shyness and excitability, or like, maybe it's not excited. You said you were excitable, but like it's more about like that kind of like, I'm going to be in the public eye, but I'm also shy. Which I'm curious if that was like, I don't know if you can describe it exactly, but like, was it a constant state of like a push and pull, or was it that like when you were going to be in the public eye, you were there in the moment in the public eye and the shyness dissipated?
Well, I think it was an all-encompassing push and pull. For like, school presentations were torture, you know, but I loved being with people and being, I mean, theater is a good example because, you know, you have your moment where you're saying things, you know, out on the stage. And, yeah, I guess the shyness would dissipate on stage generally. I guess that is what happened. And like I'd be so nervous for school presentations, like everybody. That's not uncommon. In fact, it's extremely common. It's more common than the opposite. But I talk about this occasionally, but I used to blush really fiercely as a teenager, just like bright red, and it would extend. It would just be this extended embarrassment that I would like feel in my whole body. And, but it didn't happen when I was performing. It would happen maybe after, like if I were up in front of the class or something and I was giving, reading something, I would be okay. And then I'd sit down and immediately turn bright red. And it used to really bother me because it's like, I wish that didn't happen, because then I could just be embarrassed internally and, like everybody wouldn't know that I was embarrassed. That was kind of like the worst part that I felt about it, was like, I'm okay being embarrassed if I can hide it, because then it's just a feeling I have and nobody will really know. And then so I started to take comfort in the fact that actually when I was like up there in the moment, I guess maybe there was something physiological going on where like the blushing wouldn't like happen until after.
Yeah.
And so I started kind of like relaxing into that part of it. It was like, okay, well, I don't really have to worry about that while I'm like presenting or performing or whatever. And then at a certain point, you just reach sort of an acceptance about it where it's like, well, the more I worry about this, the worse it gets. And so, if I'm like deeply embarrassed and I'm really afraid of blushing, it's going to mean that it's going to happen more strongly and last longer than if I'm just whatever, I don't care. And so I just had to come to terms with it. I just had to accept it and then move on. And it took me years. It took me probably like 5 or 6 years. Like it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I was really like, okay, who cares? It's like, it's fine. Whatever. It's just part of you and what happens. Yeah.
Did you really have that conversation with yourself, or was that like, what was the process like?
No, I had to have that conversation with myself. I did. I had to be like, okay, like it was something I had to get over, and I had to do it. I had to do it by talking to myself about it.
Yeah, that's very mature. Or maybe I'm just comparing you with myself, where it wasn't until like I got into therapy that I started to really like be able to like get over my issues.
Right.
And I think that's what I'm kind of curious about. Like when you described yourself, I guess, as like, I'm Catherine, I play the piano. Like, was that it seems like that was, my question in my head from earlier was like, was that a self-aware kind of like, this is who I am? And it seems like that is. It seems like if you have the ability in your 20s to, and then again, maybe I'm just using myself and maybe I am not, and maybe I'm immature, but like as the sounding board for this. But if you are able to have that kind of conversation with yourself where like, I don't like this aspect of myself, I'm going to do something, I'm going to change. And it's this like kind of deep physiological feeling that you're getting, and this like, and you're able to kind of control it. It seems like you have like a self-awareness about yourself. Is that accurate, or am I just...
No, it is. I mean, when I'm talking, yes, I think that's true, that I'm definitely like quite self-aware in general.
I would support that statement.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, but when I'm talking about like, I'm Catherine, I play the piano, that's me like as an older Catherine looking back on curly haired blonde Catherine and like, being like, I was an outgoing kid. I'm talking about like being like 4 or 5, like before you're like self-conscious, before you come into that phase where you're aware of like what other people might think about you. You're like, that's a part of my personality that is still there. I'm sure it doesn't go away. It just gets kind of like toned down a little bit, where like, I love talking to people, meeting new people on it. But then there's also that other part of me that's like, yeah, a little bit shy, a little bit like reserved, a little bit private, about like certain things. And like that like I reveal things as I trust people. That's like part of growing up, right? That's not just kind of like, just like, I'm me. Which is how I don't know, like maybe that, I barely remember me at that age. So I'm only going on what people tell me. You know, like what family members would tell me, and, you know, other people who were there who were older and could kind of be like, okay.
When did the shyness start creeping in then?
I mean, I really think like, you know, probably 9 or 10.
Uh-huh.
And then it got like, but maybe, yeah, like around 9 or 10. But then it wasn't really, I think, until puberty that like it got really intense.
Is that just like, was there anything linked to it, or was it just like, that's puberty, period? Or that's puberty, exclamation mark?
Who knows? Who knows? I think it's just like, I think it could have been a lot of things, and it could have been everything, and it could have been puberty. I mean, I think growing up is just hard. You know, growing up is just hard. And like there are all kinds of weird things that happen to you as a kid and as a teen, and you know, you have to deal with kids at school, and you know, all kinds of stuff that like is not necessarily easy to navigate, and then you kind of through those experiences you learn about who you are.
Mark, do you think that's accurate when it comes to you?
Which part of it? The growing up is hard thing?
Yeah. Because you described yourself as pretty accepting of everything. Like things just happen and you're like, yep, that's it.
Well, it depends what it is too. I mean, I've had some really intense emotional periods of my life as well. I'm just thinking in terms of like, I'm viewing a lot of things in my life right now through being a grad student, because that's what I am. And when Catherine was talking about giving a class presentation, I thought about how like stuff like that doesn't really make me nervous or awkward or thinking about it too much. But in terms of being really accepting of everything, I think I'm accepting of a lot of things, but I can still have very severe reactions and be affected by things too. So I would second that growing up is interesting. I wouldn't say that I always love adulting. If that makes sense. I don't remember, like, I don't think my teenagers were particularly hard or fun. I mean, growing up like queer in the prairies of Canada is not easy. I'll give you that. You know, I mean, getting jumped and beaten up is not fun. But that was also a rarity. So I think for the most part, I just kind of watched it happen and I was intrigued by it more than truly struggling with it, I suppose.
I guess that's what I meant by when I said, like, it seemed like you were, these are my words, but like kind of Riley standing there watching existence in some way.
Yeah, that's, I guess. I mean, but in a very proactive way too. I mean, I definitely seek things out to watch, you know? Like I travel a lot and I look at stuff and I won't even walk home the same way twice if I can help it. So, yeah.
Because I'm wondering about
watching. How's that?
I'm wondering about Calgary because I just talked to Raleigh Pemberton, Caden's Weapon, on the show, and he grew up in Edmonton.
Yes, he
and
did.
The way that he described Edmonton was like, he basically described Alberta as like Canada's Texas in some way.
Yeah, that's true.
And he said Edmonton was more where like the people that worked on the oil rigs lived, and Calgary was more where the people like the oil executives lived. And there was like a class difference. And I'm wondering if that's accurate for your experience.
Well, I mean, I grew up in one of the roughest neighborhoods of Calgary, and I went to what's known as like the roughest high school. They say it's the roughest high school in Alberta. I went to Forest Lawn High School. There was a shooting on my first day and a stabbing on my last day.
Oh, God.
And I saw those things. I think Raleigh's right. I have a very complicated relationship with Calgary. And at the same time, some of the most amazing people I know in the world are there. Some of the most artistic, open, brave, and intriguing people live there. And then there's a whole other thing that doesn't make it quite so easy. I was pretty lucky that you can't really clock me very easily, so it wasn't too hard for me. But I know a lot of people who were maybe, much more flamboyant or much more maybe painfully shy or something. I know a lot of people that I went to school with were picked on just for being shy. That seemed to be something that was very easily attacked.
How did you emotionally deal with seeing that kind of violence? As a teenager, that seems extremely difficult.
The shooting and the stabbing, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, they were both from a distance, and it was kind of par for the course of living in that neighborhood. As terrible as it sounds to say that. As an adult, I lived in the Lower East, not the Lower East Side, downtown East Side of Vancouver. And I saw a lot of terrible things there too. It's not like you ever come to accept it, but it's also, just kind of part of being there. In both of those cases, the shooting, for example, it went through the student's pant leg and it didn't get their leg, for example. And the stabbing, the student who was stabbed also lived. Emotionally, the shooting was on my first day of high school, so that was terrifying. That didn't help me be any more comfortable with going to high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But emotionally, I don't know. I guess I feel really, really, a lot of your questions you're asking, I feel like I just had a really great mom and dad, and I got to talk about these things, right? And the thing you mentioned earlier about therapy, I have an amazing therapist now who helps me through sorting out a lot of things also. So I think that I always just had the chance to filter through these things, and I'm very consciously thankful for that.
Yeah. You seem very even keeled, and I'm curious if you've always been even keeled then.
Well, no, Catherine's seen me at some unevenly keeled moments, I suppose. But I can say, in a way, I guess it would be yes and no. So, on the surface, as a teenager, I was probably just very calm looking. Quite early, I was obsessed with music. I would go to the library and I would find old issues of music magazines and cut out every article I could find about REM, for example, which I sent in an envelope to Catherine's husband, I think 2 years ago. And obsessed with Sonic Youth and Elastica and just stuff that nobody else at my school was listening to, and that seemed to give me some sort of latitude. But at the same time, just totally terrified inside, being the gay kid at school that nobody knew. So,
was there any kind of queer community that you could? I think we're about the same age, so I'm going to guess no, because I was a teenager in the 90s. But maybe it's different in Canada.
Everything I'd say is different in Canada. I don't know why I said that. Actually, I don't know if it's different in Canada. I have no idea. No, there wasn't. At least where I was, there wasn't. And even when I started making music, I was out. And I was told by some people I worked with, there was I think it was a booking agent and there was a manager person who didn't want me to be out. They thought it would be not a good idea to be out, but I wanted to be out. And now some of the people that were making music in Calgary at the same time, 15 years later, there's some that are still out of the blue messaging me to say they've just come out and they were grateful that I was out when I was doing stuff in 2007, right? But that whole world has changed so much too.
Yeah.
Now out musicians are everywhere, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. Catherine, what was Victoria like? Did you grow up there? I want to come back to it. I just want to bounce back and forth.
I did. I grew up in Victoria. I spent a few years in the Netherlands when I was a kid.
Like what ages?
9 to 12.
Okay.
Yeah. My dad got a teaching job in a small town in the south of Holland. And so my family, we went on a 3-year adventure to Europe. But for the most part, I was in Victoria. And it was just a very, I feel like it was a very typical, went to elementary school up the street and, would go to my friends' houses after school and, did activities and, did my music lessons. Do you know what I mean? It was just growing up in Victoria was what you would think. Maybe.
I have no preconceived notions of Victoria, so.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful place to grow up because, my house was, that my childhood home was like kind of a 10-minute walk from the ocean. And so it's a very peaceful place to grow up because there's a lot of nature and people really value the nature around here. And so activities would involve going to the lake in the summer and, all the things that kids do. And yeah, so it's like it's pretty much like paradise here. And it's small, it's a small city, so some people don't like that about it. And some people, might feel the need. There's a lot of jokes about, I don't know how true it is now, but at the time, everybody left Victoria to go to Montreal. When you hit a certain age, you left Victoria and you'd go to Toronto or Montreal because Victoria, it is beautiful, but it's not particularly exciting. It's not like an exciting place where there's tons of, you can find lots of beautiful, great art, but you have to look for it. Whereas in the bigger cities, it's a little bit more kind of everywhere. And, so there's a lot of kind of shelteredness about Victoria that I think people, kind of grow out of, or they'd like to go and expand and see other things. And so I'm grateful that, I had the opportunity to live abroad, for a few years, because that meant that I had this kind of idea of other cultures outside of, my Victoria, childhood. And it made me interested in languages and in other places in the world and how interesting the world is. And so I always loved coming back to Victoria because of the peacefulness of the area, and it's always been, my home. So I've been to quite a few places, and there are very few places that are as beautiful as Victoria and the surrounding area.
Did you have that desire in you before you moved to the Netherlands to discover things that were outside of Victoria?
I had no concept of, I was only 8, when I moved. And so I was just living my kid life and, going to piano lessons, like I said, and going to school. And, I had very little awareness of anything like that. And so I didn't have any kind of desire. I remember, thinking that it was cool when I was, when my parents were like, "Hey, we're gonna go to Europe," and I'm like, that's interesting, like, okay. And then, the big feeling when you leave is like you're leaving your friends. You're like, oh, well, I'm leaving all my friends for a few years, which, is a really long time when you're a kid. And I remember the house being empty because we moved all of our stuff. It was like, it was through that. My dad's job was through the Department of National Defense. So it was like a teaching job, but it was at an international school that was there was a NATO base in the town. And so a lot of the kids who were at the school were American, Canadian, British, German, military, military kids. And so we had one of those situations where you could pack up your whole house in your car and ship it to Europe, and so I just remember our house being empty and like running around on the floors, sliding on the floors. Like those are the memories I have of when those are the 8-year-old memories are this feeling of like, here's this empty house. I'm in my socks. Let's go for it. Wow, there are a lot of boxes. Look at all these boxes, and very little about like, what is it going to mean to me to live in Europe? Or like, yeah, the arriving in the Netherlands. And one of my first memories is we were at this hotel, and the hotels in Europe are a little bit different because their measurement system is different. So all the rooms are a little bit of a different dimension because they're in meters and centimeters and not feet and inches. And so I remember being in this hotel and being kind of like, oh, this is interesting. Like the beds are different and the tap is different and the sink is different. But my main memory is that we had this like orange drink at the continental breakfast that was like, it must have been like Tang or something. It was like this like orange drink. And I remember being like, this is the best thing I've ever tasted in my life. And so excited like to get to the hotel lobby for this breakfast so I could have this like orange drink. Those are the memories of an 8-year-old.
Do you know how that experience transformed you at all? Or if it did at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think the experience of moving to Europe did have a big impact on my life. One for like kind of the reasons that I talked about, where it was, you kind of like, there was a confidence I had in traveling after having been somewhere like that and knowing that, we lived in Europe and we traveled around and that I could do that. And so I had that kind of like, there's a confidence there. I went from a kind of a small town, we'll call it like a small city school from Victoria to a school that was mostly military kids who move around a lot. They were a lot cooler. They were a lot tougher than I was. And I found that difficult because I was like this, like kind of a nerdy little kid who really liked to do book reports. I was like, I love reading and I like love doing well in school and I love school. And I went to this school that was like, the kids were just so much more advanced and into all kinds of things. And I was just like, whoa, like, I don't even know what to do here. And so I had my like friends and I found like some like really wonderful hobbies that where I had some really good friends, but I had a tough time like at that school only kind of in 1 year. The other 2 years were totally fine, but it was still like just a totally different vibe. And I was like, so I was a little bit of like a fish out of water in that sense, but not totally. There was like other really great experiences, and I went to a Dutch school for a little bit. Long story, doesn't matter. And that was cool. And so I had like, Like, it was a mixed bag, basically. And so I came back to Canada with all of these, like, experiences that I'd had. And sort of like they kind of all melded into, you know, kind of me as a teenager with all these, like, things that I'd experienced and seen and done. And then I settled right back into, you know, Canadian school, Canadian friends, and really into music, and, you know, yeah.
Mark, I was wondering, and I thought of this back when you said it, but do you know, like, what it was about the accordion that appealed to you as a child? Because it's a very complicated instrument, and it's also like it's associated here, at least in America, with like polka, like kind of nerdier kinds of things.
Yeah, that's true. My mother's from Vienna, and my Oma died when I was quite young, and it was an instrument that she played. So when I was 5, I just told my mom that I wanted to play it because my Oma liked it. I had no, like, it's not like I dreamt about the accordion before I picked one up. And I also fell out of love with it because it's an incredible instrument, but it's also, like, it does its thing, right? And I guess I felt kind of like I'd taken that thing as far as I really could or wanted to. Yeah. I remember quitting. I quit it after a recital where I played the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I messed up the last note so badly. That dun 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 thing. That I just kind of, I wasn't embarrassed. I guess I was just more mortified and tired. And so I was like, I'm done with this. Yeah. But I had no special love of the accordion. I still have my childhood accordion somewhere. And certain members of my band have played it over the years, and we all kind of laugh about it. And it usually comes out for like a song. And it goes back.
So you were done with it, and then, like, when does music, or maybe playing music, come back into your life?
Mid-20s. I was living in Scotland, and my friends and I had no money, and at one point we were living in this one place together, and we were accused of taking food, which we hadn't done. So we had to move to another place, and all the people that lived at the first place, as kind of like a show of support, they all helped us move our stuff over to the new stuff, and I was helping 2 Swiss girls learn English, and they had this guitar in their hands for the walk. And then when we got to the new place, they gave me the guitar because they'd stolen it. And they said, if you're accused of stealing, you should probably get to steal something. So that was my first guitar. And I just played the guitar really to just while some time away. There was no grand plan for me, really. And that was how I just started playing music. And then I came to really love it.
There was nothing, like, missing in those middle years between the accordion and the guitar. I'm just curious as like when you start doing, like, creative things that kind of, like, are deeply entwined with, like, yourself, capital Y, yourself, right? It took me into, like, moving to New York to start doing comedy to realize that had been missing from my life. Really dedicating myself to doing this. And I'm kind of curious if that was similar for you, or if it was just like, no, you know, like, it was fun, and then it's meaningful to write songs, but it wasn't like I was missing something in those middle years.
Well, I went to film school, so I was making lots of films. And then, actually, do you remember that guy, Cassio Tone, for The Painfully Alone?
Mm-hmm.
Remember that? So, I saw him play once in Edinburgh. And I talked to him afterwards, and we had this long conversation. And he mentioned that he'd also been to film school. And I was like, oh, you know, isn't making films hard? And he just said to me that he started making music because he realized he could tell his stories far easier through music. Like, a song can take you an afternoon, whereas a film takes you months. And kind of from that point on, I was like, yeah, I'm just going to tell my stories easier through music.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't live without it now. It's literally like what I would love to do all the time. But yeah, it didn't feel missing, I wouldn't say. And then I started doing it, and I was like, oh, like, where have you been all my life? You know?
Catherine, you started playing in a band as a teenager, right?
Yes. Yeah, like I was in piano lessons for a long time. And then, my first band, I think maybe 16. That was my first real kind of experience. And I loved it. Like, I loved it immediately. I remember singing into a microphone, and there was like this power that comes from like singing into a microphone that is very different from singing in choir or just singing along, at home. I was like, oh, wow, this is cool. That's a cool sound. It's a cool feeling. So I was definitely, I really, loved that. And, so I kind of just I almost would say I stumbled into it, except that I had been doing music for so long that any opportunity to do music I would take, band, choir, whatever, just any of the bands, all the bands, and, all the music, and practicing after school. And yeah, I was just such a music nerd.
Do you know what it was about? I mean, obviously music is specifically for you, do you remember what it was about it that got to you, that got to your DNA?
Well, I think first of all, I was good at it, and I found it came easily. And I think that always is a nice feeling when you're doing something and you kind of feel like you kind of just know that you're pretty good at it. If that makes any sense. If you're just like, my brain just works like this. That's not the thought you have, but you're like, but something just like suits you somehow. So I always felt like that with music, that I found it came easily. And I liked the puzzle of it. I liked that you could start off not knowing how to play something, and then through practice and effort, by the end of the month or whatever, you would have grown and be able to do this thing that you weren't able to do before. And so every stage was like that for me, particularly in piano. And so that's why I was motivated to practice all the time, because I liked the feeling of, this is hard, I don't know how to do this, but I know that if I keep at it, and it won't be too long, I will be able to do it. And so there was always this sort of satisfying thing for me, for particularly piano, because it's a really fun instrument. Like, when it starts to work, it's really hard to get it to work because it's like involves separate fingers, and your hands are doing different things at different times. But when you get to the point where that makes sense to you and you can do it, and your hands and your brain are connected in the way that makes that fairly easy, it's really fun. You can go really fast. You can do it's like there's a lot of joy in just like being able to just play, And so those were the parts of music that I really loved. And then initially, and then once I started getting into bands, I started to get really, I remember being 14 or 15, and I really wanted, my friend was a dancer. She was a ballet dancer, and I really wanted to compose like a ballet. So I've never been not ambitious. Mm-hmm. I got I think maybe 8 bars into that ballet before I was like, okay, this is actually really hard to just compose a ballet, on the piano. But I always and then I got into more of the creative, composing and writing your own songs, which had up until I was, 16, I had never really done much of that. And I found that I also really enjoyed it. And it was also like a puzzle, but in a little bit of a different way, where you're trying to fit all these pieces together.
Right.
create something not unlike, a podcast or, like I'm sure comedy, is the same thing. You're kind of trying to like anything that's creative. You're like, how do I put these pieces together into something that I like? And so I just found that was really satisfying with music, was like, there's a puzzle aspect, I think, of it that I find intriguing, which keeps me entertained.
Yeah, definitely for me, there's that kind of like putting pieces together. I think for my wife, it's more like a intuitive gut feeling. I'm wondering, Mark, for you, like, how does it manifest? Is it just something that is it a puzzle like with Catherine that you're like, oh, well, I know that like I played an A chord here, so what would be a surprising chord to play next? Or, that's the reductive way of saying it, but do you know what I mean? Or do you think it's more like something you kind of like feel?
I think it'll be both. I wouldn't say that I always know what chord I'm playing, so I often ask Catherine what the chords are. Because I guess maybe that's one reason of the many why we work so well together, is that I'm completely untrained. And so I quite often don't know what I'm doing. But I think it's a combination of those two things. I mean, talking about the puzzle is definitely evocative to me, because feeling pieces come together, and especially pieces that come from someone else's brain that you love and trust so much. So like, if I sing something and then Catherine sings a harmony to it, that still blows my mind every time. Right? And it always will. Or like, I'll do stuff on the guitar, then she'll do some keyboard thing that just plays off of it in a way that, because we are two different people, there's no way that I ever would have found that on my own. So, but definitely, like, there's a lot of gut in it for sure, and just what feels right and where you go. And I love that if I can't actually play something, I can just sing it and she'll play it in 3 seconds, which is always amazing to me.
When you decide to go to film school, do you remember like what it was, or like what that decision was like for you? Like, why was it film that was the medium that you wanted to work in originally?
I was just obsessed with film as a kid, like film and music. Like, I was at the cinema all the time and at video stores all the time, and buying records all the time. I guess I was just always in love with listening to things and looking at things. And I guess because there wasn't like indie rock school, film school seemed to be the one that I could do that would fit me the most. And I went, I had a lovely time. I have a degree in film theory and also one in production. So like, I feel like I can know how to talk about them and how to watch them, and at the same time also know how to make them. But yeah, film to me just was just like a great love. And then it was literally that conversation with Casio Tone fellow that made me realize that, yeah, you can, to me anyways, get the same feeling of telling a story through a song, like especially all that music that we describe as cinematic or sweeping or epic or layered. To me, it does the same thing. Yeah, I'm glad I have that thing. And at least in terms of a film theory degree in a lot of ways is basically just a philosophy degree, right? You're just learning how to watch something that degrades every time it's spun through a projector. So it's always a different experience, and such is life.
Was there any escapism in getting into music and getting into film? Because you described Calgary as, maybe I'm not using the right words that you use, but like rough and tumble.
The part of Calgary that I was in was, I wouldn't say, there's a lot of super swank bits of Calgary for sure. But the thing I've always felt about Calgary is that those of us who grew up there and escaped from there, while we were there, we had to build our own little worlds however we could. And most of that was like untangible. So creating like a film kind of atmosphere with your friends, which I did a lot. I made a bunch of little films with my friends, and then transitioning that into like a band and having like band rehearsal 2 nights a week with 8 people and just creating your own kind of little enclave of things because in Calgary, like I am grateful that I grew up in Calgary because of, I think it taught me a lot of the person I am today, but I still feel like, you know, like a sensitive artistic kind of enclave of people is vastly outnumbered. So you do have to kind of group together and you do have to kind of make stuff. And maybe that's the kind of escapism that you're asking about, because it definitely felt like we were a definite team of people. A lot of them have scattered to the wind. A lot of them aren't there anymore. But at that time that I was there making music, we definitely built something that we could escape to within our own city, for sure.
So there was no pre-existing scene that you could kind of get involved with. You and other people that were making things kind of built it from the ground up?
No, there was amazing scenes there. There was like, I was a DJ at CJSW, which is the campus community station in Calgary, which is also one of the biggest in Canada. So, and then in terms of film, there's the Calgary Underground Film Society that I was hanging out at a bit. There's like Quick Draw Animation Society as well. So those pockets are there. Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily huge pockets. They're just like active and faithful, I guess. So, but growing up, like as a teen in Calgary, the music scene was not, you know, it's not super varied. And then there was a bit of an explosion of amazing stuff. Like when I started making music, the music coming out of Calgary, I thought was some of the best music in the world. Like, it was incredible. And for a short window, you could go to like a show almost every night. And I remember one night where we were headlining a show with 2 bands we really loved, and then another big venue had the same thing, and then another one did, and all the shows were sold out, and it was all local bands. That felt really nice. So there's 100% there's glimpses, and there was scenes there. And I don't totally know what the scenes are now, but there's always something happening there. You just have to find it, and once you find it, it's certainly more vibrant than you maybe initially expected. Mm-hmm. Just not huge.
Why did you leave to go to Scotland?
I was working on film sets, and I realized how much I didn't like it. And my family is half Scottish, half Austrian. And some friends and I, we were just obsessed with music out of Scotland. Like Bell and Sebastian and Mogwai and Arab Strap and
Sure.
the Delgados, all this stuff. Like, I think at one point, if I had 5 favorite bands, maybe 4 of them were Scottish. So we went, and it was amazing. It was great. I would go again.
Catherine, your mom was a piano teacher, right?
Well, she was a teacher. Like a classroom teacher is what I mean. Can I rewind that? Because that makes it sound like I don't think piano teachers are teachers. And oh my God. Because I absolutely do. But the reason I say that is because she was a classroom teacher. And but when I talk about my like early years, she did teach me piano, and so it comes up sometimes where so she taught me a little bit of piano early on, but I always had piano teachers, other teachers. And so my mom was a classroom teacher, my dad also too.
Okay, so the child of 2 teachers. Did you have any siblings when you were growing up?
Yeah, I have an older brother.
Okay. I'm just trying to figure out like what the dynamics were. And same thing for you, Mark. You said your mom was from Austria, and I guess your dad was from Scotland. How did they end up in Canada?
Well, my dad was born in Canada. My mother moved to Canada. So my Opa and Oma were both from really big families, and most of the relatives there, either a few of them stayed in Austria, most of them moved to the Bronx.
Interesting.
And then we were the only ones that moved to Calgary. Like, he saw Calgary somehow. And one of our other relatives who was obsessed with skiing lived there. So that's how we ended up there. Yeah, just I guess like somewhat post-war stuff, having to leave the place. Yeah. we're only just recently kind of figuring a lot of this stuff out. Like, Vienna was partitioned into 5 zones, and our family all lived in the Russian zone, and things weren't particularly great living in the Russian zone, so they left.
Weird.
Yeah. It's not a city that's talked about in the same way that like Berlin is or other partition cities, but up until for about 10 years after the war, Vienna was kind of split in ways. Like it's a lot of it's in The Third Man, which is a great film that's not only an amazing film but also has like an actual amazing bunch of historical truths to it.
Yeah. I'm kind of obsessed on this show with like ruptures in people's lives and how that changes people. That's why I was asking like a lot about like moving around and things like that, because I do think those are very formative. You're on this path in your life in some way. Either you are conscious of it or not conscious of it. And it's usually like your parents have like laid down a script for you and you're just like following it along. And then something happens to knock you. I find this at least more often than not with people I talk to on the show. If you are creating something and you're trying to do it professionally or doing it professionally, that usually it's about being othered in some way when you're younger, and you kind of like gain some kind of self-awareness that you might not have gained otherwise. Or there's something that happens to just knock you off of the script that everyone else seems to be on.
Yeah, I mean...
Wondering if that makes sense to both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I was a queer kid who grew up in the prairie, so I was definitely othered, and I was terrified a lot of the time. Catherine? How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that, there's a lot of stuff about being human that is pretty universal. And I think that what you just described there, Andy, is very universal. Is that like, we think that other people haven't gone through things, and I bet you pretty much everyone has. Like, who has the perfect childhood with absolutely nothing going on? Because
Sure.
Because literally, like, one of the things that I got interested in, like, I didn't realize I was really interested in it, but it was psychology. So later on, like in my 30s, and they talk about kind of like mental health and how common how common depression is, how common anxiety is, that like, it's, like depression. I remember one of my professors saying it's like as prevalent as like, it's like the common cold of like mental illness. It is so common. And those are things that, we just still don't really talk about. We do talk about them more now, but like, and so I think that, we all like, I think it's just so universal that there's, family, kind of like mental health issues, or, or like, then all this stuff that it really starts coming out in your teen years or earlier, or like, somebody, it's just, but you just don't know it because there's not usually like a space to really kind of like talk about those things, always. Or you don't want it, or you don't want to yet, or whatever it happens to be. So I think that you're right that like, there's a script, there's like what you think life is. And then at some point something happens and you're like, whoa, that's really intense. I had no idea. That certainly like, I mean, it's happened a lot in my life, but particularly My mom was really ill with this illness called ALS, which is a terrible illness, and so cruel, just out of control. Like it's been 13 years and I'm talking about it here and I feel like this emotion coming up and I'm like, wow, that's a long, 13 years and I'm still kind of like, when I put it in those terms, I'm like, wow, like I'm still affected by it, clearly, because you never stop being affected. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I guess my point is that, yeah, like life is, this very interesting balance of you start off very unself-conscious, generally, not everybody, because people are different. But I think you start off like as this baby, as this child, and you're like, like I talk about curly-haired, outgoing Catherine, right? And then you kind of like start having experiences out in the world where you start getting more self-conscious, you start going through puberty, you start kind of like becoming aware, and then you have these like, family dynamics that start coming into play, or like, illness, or, whatever it is, and you're like, whoa, life is totally crazy, and you go to therapy, maybe, and then you come out being like, okay, I think I've got a handle on this, and then life will throw you another couple of loops.
Yeah, I mean, that, the other thing that I'm curious about too is like, because I think we're all around the same age, is that in the 80s, none of either like mental health issues, LGBTQ plus issues, like it was outside of like, outside of discussions about like, say, AIDS or something like that, it was not very prevalent in society. Like, I forget, I was like, not even like there wasn't even media up until like Will and Grace that addressed things, LGBTQ issues, and like mental illness. Like, I think like Prozac Nation or something like that was the first attempt for there to be any kind of like public discussion. And so like, there's a lot of stuff that we have all kind of like, I don't want to say repressed, at least for me. I don't want to talk for either of you, obviously, but like parts of ourselves that we felt alienated from, at least me growing up, that only later in life was I able to talk about in public, or talk about, in therapy, in a way that I could like reintegrate that stuff into my life or into myself. And I ask this stuff not to like poke trauma or anything like that, but what I'm curious about is like your creative life, as if you have even gone through the same experience that I have. What was your creative life through this? Were you both alienated from these parts of yourselves growing up? Did you have that kind of same experience that I did? How did your creative life transform through this process? I know that's a lot, but it's and I say this out of like a love of both of your music, of like both together and on your own and other groups and stuff like that.
Man, I thought you were going to ask us about what certain songs meant. Okay, so one thing you hit on that I definitely grew up was the whole thing I learned about being a gay person in the 90s was that I would die. Because sex was just a death sentence. Everything from seeing like, TLC wearing condoms on their clothes to like Philadelphia. Like my aunt took me to go see the movie Philadelphia when I was like 15 years old. And, the message was literally just like, if you embraced your sexual being, you would die. And that was a huge traumatic thing that's like still something I think about a lot. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm in grad school and I'm actually researching and talking about HIV/AIDS activism in the early 90s. And talking to these men who are my elders and women, and once in a while just hitting on certain questions like, where are your friends now? And the answer is like, well, they're all dead. They're all gone. So there's there's definitely a huge ghost that one carries around with them, even though it's very common of men of my generation to say like, oh, I'm so glad I didn't have to live through that. But in a way we all did, because we lost everybody older than us, right? So yeah, there's certainly an element of that sort of traumatic experience that goes on kind of from like a remove, in a sense. But in terms of like music and trauma, I guess for me, it's always been kind of a way of processing stuff. And if something has been dark enough or painful enough, I've actually chosen not to process it in music because I don't want to carry that song around with me for the rest of my career. And I don't want to sing a song that puts something so fresh on my mind, because I guess I kind of think of songs as little ghosts that come around with me. So there's certain bad experiences in my life that I specifically chose not to write about. Invariably, I have ended up writing about them, but for a period of time, I just didn't want to, because I don't want to carry that around all the time. I don't want somebody to ask me to play them that song when I'm performing somewhere. Yeah, those are just two thoughts that come to me for that. Deserve a question.
I was going to say barrage, but yeah. What about you, Catherine?
The question was,
I'm curious just about like your own creative process, as you're growing up, as you are coming to understand yourself better as a person, how it changes. If you were like me and kind of like alienated from yourself in some way, and then had to eventually like reintegrate that part of you.
I think that I feel like I just grew more into being aware. I don't know that if I felt like alienated from myself necessarily, but I do know that I felt like I got more awareness of myself as I went, and I wanted more awareness, and so I think that has reflected certainly in my creativity as it's gone. Like I definitely use music, particularly lyrically, as a way to kind of access things that are going on. I think it's quite common. I've heard other people talk about it, where you kind of write a song, you don't really know what it's about, and then a few years later, you're like, oh, that's what that was about. You kind of like look back and go, oh yeah, I was going through this, and I wrote this song, and it's a stream of consciousness a little bit. There's like the craft, of course, of like fitting things together, but the fundamental, like a lot of when I'm writing, and I only started doing this when I really started writing songs on my own. I remember I used to feel really frustrated by the idea of what is my song going to be about. Mm-hmm. Like I was like going to sit down and write a song, and I just was like, felt really blocked by this sort of like idea that you have to know what your song is about before you start writing it. Almost like it felt really like just uninspiring way to start a song lyrically. And so once I figured that out about myself, I'm sure it's different for other people, but once I figured that out, that I just have to start singing words, and they are gibberish generally, and they just come out, and I'll be accessing something that I'm thinking about. I won't even know it. I try not to think about it, and then I edit it together and turn it into a song. And maybe the meaning will change. Maybe I don't really want to sing about what I'm singing about, and I'll change it slightly more, like a little bit more intellectually, or I'll relate it to something else, and I'll change subjects halfway through the song. So then it becomes less clear what it's about, which I also kind of like in a way, where like I change subjects so that like the you. If I initially was starting to sing about one person, I'll change the you to somebody else, so it's not totally clear who I'm singing about, mm-hmm. or what I'm singing about, or what, and then that makes it like protective for me, so that I can sing about something more truthfully without necessarily feeling like I'm, kind of like going to expose something, and about somebody else or about me that I don't want to. So that I don't, maybe that's a bit weird, but I like the stream of consciousness access into creativity, which is where I'm going with this. And that I find is like very instinctive and very felt. And that has been something that I've like really tapped into over the last, I don't know, I would say maybe like 10 years of like really tuning into the internal voice that is guiding the ship, and I'm like, well, if the internal voice doesn't like it, then we're scrapping it, it's like, there's nothing I can do about that. I'm not going to try and force this. And that's been something that I've like gotten better at listening to, because it is a quiet voice. And it kind of just is like you're kind of like, what is it about that I don't like, and get rid of it.
Yeah. It's funny when you talked about not knowing what a thing is about and then only later realizing it. I remember I wrote a stage show with my old writing partner, and it was about these two kid detectives who they're like in their early 20s. They've been kid detectives for all their lives. And the one of them wants to be a kid detective for his entire life, and the other one wants to go off and do something new. And that was like, we finished writing it, and then like a month later we stopped working together because I wanted to keep doing comedy, and he was like, I'm done with this stuff. And it's so weird how that, like, I mean, maybe it's not weird for other people. It's weird how ignorant I was of what was happening right in front of me, and that I was channeling it in some weird subconscious way into this thing I was writing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really identified with what you said. I don't want to keep you guys any longer, but I really appreciate you both talking with me.
Thanks, Andy. This has been really great and deep.
Yeah. Yeah. Question 1. Tell me about your childhood.
Did you learn anything new about each other through this?
I think it just solidified things. Like, I feel I know Catherine well, and I really like that.
Yeah.
Like, I will definitely second. I know you're wrapping it up, but the thing Catherine was just talking about, like the last record I made on my own, I specifically didn't want to write about a breakup. And now I listen to that record and I'm just like, yeah, this is just a breakup record.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy, but it's because you are both mature musicians. You are both like, you have made things for a long time. And so there is just this, I think this is my own dumb theories. I don't think it holds for everyone, but it seems like once you're in that space where you're kind of comfortable in your body and in your creative self, that the stuff just kind of flows in some way.
That's true. I found that like, I mean, once I learned, I went through like the years and years of learning what didn't work for me and what does work for me. Now I, at least at the moment, feel like I'm in a place where I'm like, this style of working doesn't work for me, but this does. So I'm just going to focus on the things that do work. And I know this, and this about myself. And those are and I just don't worry about trying to do it a certain way, or, just focus on like what I know works for me.
Yeah. And having someone that you can do that with is, for me, the most amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I trust everything Catherine does all the time, which is great, because that's a new experience for me. Well, not that I didn't trust everybody I've worked with before, but just like, I just know that it's right. And it's very great. It's nice.
I feel the same way.
Yay. And there's something about, like, I feel so comfortable in music now because I quit, right? And then coming back to it, just a totally different relationship to it, because I know that I could leave it, right?
Yeah.
And I never want to leave it again. Like, this is what I just want to do, and I want to keep doing this. But having been able to leave it let me come back to it in just like a much more enjoyable way.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. That like at some point whatever you're doing becomes, it doesn't have to be creative, but like it's your identity. And it becomes so infused with you. And then you're like, well, I can't. It almost feels like I've been talking a lot about grief in therapy, but like it feels like a kind of like death in some way. And I don't mean to I don't mean to like minimize actual death, but like there's the feeling of like losing that part of you. There's like a grief there.
Mm-hmm.
That like when you come back to it, it's not like you realize like, oh, I can lose part of I not lose part of me, but like I'm okay. I'm still existing and I can still create. And it's not like the things that I do are not so deeply entwined with me, even if I do enjoy them, or even if they're like existentially part of me in some way. I know that's muddled, but I'm not
like
articulating it well.
Off.
Yeah.
It's like you take the pressure off when you do that, and you're like, okay, like I'm still me.
Yeah.
Without the pressure of like
Yes.
having to like have this weight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it lets you write and create things in a different way too. Like I still view my like music making life in two parts. And the first part, I was very, very, very interested in the idea of like really perfecting some sort of songcraft, and like every song had to have like, oh, like does that need like a bridge, like that sort of thing, and just making this like really working towards like, oh, would Ray Davies like this kind of thing? And now it's just like I don't feel that way at all, because I came back to it. And that record I was referring to a moment ago is the first record I made where I was literally just doing things, and it confused the other players that I recorded with, and that made me happy because it made sense to me. It wasn't like a songcraft thing,
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I feel like I have a totally different relationship to it now. And I love when I write something and I'm just like, oh, I have to send this to Catherine. Like, this will work for us. This is great. Yeah.
That actually seems like a really nice place to end.
When's the deadline?
When's the deadline?
And I'm like, when's the deadline?
And I'm like, tomorrow.
I'm like, I'll fit it to the deadline. Oh God.
Thank you both so much again for joining me. This was so nice.
Yeah, thanks. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
I'm glad
so
we
nice
made your whole being and body buzz with excitement and anxiety.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh, 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 bye.